Oh wow, hi, welcome back to my channel. I've been putting off doing the rest of what I hope to be the rest of the explanation of the Dramatica theory. And I'm in such a good mood because I had watched a movie reaction to Star Wars, Episode 4, A New Hope. And there's a tie-in with this channel because you may have seen the earlier video in which I believe it's the explanation of how Dramatica works. Or oh no, it's I haven't put a thumbnail to it yet, but it's the video where I explain how to watch Star Wars, and that may be a simple sentence like how do you watch a movie? You start playing it and you watch it, but it's not so easy. I explain what makes Star Wars unique, certain aspects of the Star Wars saga. I was about to say trilogy, but actually it's a whole saga. It's 3 trilogies. That is 3 movies in each trilogy. You have 3 trilogies plus 2 extra movies. And then there are spin-off TV movies and TV series and so forth. So if you want to learn more about how Star Wars is best appreciated, how to get into Star Wars, look for that video. It's not that far back. I've been putting a lot of thumbnail images, uploading new images, learning how to work with a thumbnail generator, and basically, improving the overall, it's my exuberance, improving the overall look of my YouTube channel. And so what I should tell you what prompted, I'm going to talk about the rest of Dramatica, hopefully the rest of Dramatica. I don't think there's very much left that I haven't mentioned yet in this video, nor in the video prior to this, or some episodes before this, about explaining Dramatica. So please look for that. I should put a link in to both videos. This one linking to the prior video anyway about Dramatica, and then in that one linking to this video. But all right, what prompted me to do the how to watch Star Wars video was this other YouTube channel called React 2.0. And there are 2 foreigners to myself in the United States, watching the prequel trilogy, that's episodes 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars. And then they were obviously going to watch, well, I think it was a comment that I added in the comment section to episode 3. And I said before they go into watching episode 4, they should watch Rogue One, because it's set right before episode 4, and not only does it fit in timeline-wise, but it also literally sets up the events that you see at the beginning of the 4th episode. It also evokes the shift in theme. The prequel trilogy ended in a downer note, and without going to spoilers, Rogue One is that shift thematically on several different levels as you go into the middle trilogy, that is the original trilogy, episodes 4, 5, and 6. So it makes more sense not only timeline-wise, but in terms of a viewing experience. They've already watched the first 3 episodes, and rather than be a total jolt, this is that pivot point, as I see it, between the prequel trilogy and the middle trilogy, which would be 4, 5, and 6. So when it came time for them to watch, okay, so then when I saw them post Rogue One and their reaction to it, they were extremely happy. They were saying, "Oh, they can follow this all the way through." And the older person, was especially excited. I don't want to say that the younger one wasn't excited. They were both exuberant, and so they kept saying, in the end of these videos, as usual, when there's a first reaction video to a movie, the person comments on what he or she thought about the movie just viewed, and they were both saying they understand it well, it makes sense. So now I just watched them do until I felt justified in arguing, no, don't go from episode 3 to episode 4. Watch Rogue One before you go into 4, because it continues it continues the threads that were depicted or portrayed in episode 3 and follows them through, and then it sets up where you will be at the beginning of episode 4. And as I said, not only does it fit in plot wise, but it also fits in thematically. It goes from a downer towards an upper, and it seemed like they could understand that. And then so now I watch their reaction to A New Hope, and they were positively ebullient. I mean, they were the older man was almost jumping for joy. Oh wow, yeah. And it's interesting that around the world there's a book that I saw. I think it's something like it's about Star Wars. It's about the history of Star Wars, and it's called something like How Star Wars Changed the Universe or something like that. It's a nice. I think the cover is black. I've got the hardcover, but they showed it around the world, people reacting similarly, the same reactions. And I can't remember, I think it was a Native American tribe and you get the impression that they hadn't seen American movies or movies in general or whatever. Maybe I'm remembering it sort of in an exaggerated way, but even when they watched Star Wars, they reacted the same way. Star Wars evokes common human reactions, and that's what George Lucas was trying for. He did his research well in terms of heroic myths and how humans tell stories, and he tried his best. I think he succeeded admirably. He succeeded financially in creating a new modern myth. So where do I go? So I'm so happy, I'm elated, and so forth. So all right, so now I switch from that to Dramatica, which is a theory of storytelling. It's a different approach to storytelling and screenwriting and overall narrative structure. As I told you before, there's an earlier video, and I think there's possibly an afterthought video about Dramatica. They took a psychological approach. The two developers took a psychological approach to understanding or formulating this conceptual model of the mind working its way through a dilemma and outcrops stories, basically. So I thought I was finished with it. The video was about 5.5 hours long, something like that. And even after that, I was sitting and I was watching, bad movies. It's one of my joys. I watch YouTube videos of people poking fun at inept movie directors or filmmakers, and that's a good way of noticing things that I might have forgotten to mention in explaining how screenplay structure is and how films are made, structured and so forth, and therefore Dramatica. And so these are the points that I had forgotten to include right here. You can see how I mark my notes. Somebody characterized the way I write as very artistic, the way they're laid out graphically. All right, number one is unique ability and critical flaw, and that relates to, you'll have to watch my earlier video on Dramatica. I'll include a timeline with like time marks so that I can identify if you want to jump ahead or jump through. It would act like a table of contents. But I know in there, I mentioned that there are, briefly I'll mention, there are 4 different levels, and the top level is the class level, next is type level, next is variation level, and the bottom is element level. Now, when you're using the software with the, when you're using the Dramatica theory via the software, part of it is defining what the dilemma is, the nature of the problem that you're rubbing up against for each through line. Now, I hesitate to say problem because a problem sounds like it's just one simple thing, but as you write a story and you take these elements that Dramatica gives, the way to create conflict, that's the word I was looking for. The way to create conflict is not just having 2 people fighting, or it's a problem about something. You should have that same theme, like, for example, trying to think of pursuit. It just popped into my mind. Pursuit. Don't just have one character pursuing something. You have to create a conflict based on pursuit. In other words, you have 2 statements or 2 values related to pursuit that both are justifiable in their own right, but they can't really coexist very well. And that's the nature of true conflict. I think about the moment in, I won't give away spoilers, but in the Star Wars movie, The Empire Strikes Back, is an excellent moment, an excellent example of that, where Luke has been training and his master wants him to continue training because he's not yet ready. However, he feels an obligation to go help his friends and take on the bad guy, or take on the villain. And so does he stay and continue training, or does he go and try to save his friends by stopping this villain? And that's true conflict. And even in a minor moment, I'm thinking through Empire Strikes Back, even in the moment where Han Solo is worried about his friend Luke, and near the beginning of the movie, and they're on a base, and it's freezing cold temperature outside, and Luke Skywalker hasn't come back yet, and they're worried, is he still alive? So Han Solo is caught between staying indoors and keeping safe and warm, and going out and into the cold, freezing, think Arctic, Antarctica, think those kinds of temperatures, going out and trying to find his friend and bring him home. So you're actually caught in conflict. He decides in that to go find his friend. There's an interesting point in Dramatica, something that I hadn't, as a writer, I'm using Dramatica principles, and I had a question about this too. Jim Hall, I'd mentioned Jim Hall runs an adjunct to Dramatica. It's called Subtext, subtxt.io. And that's a separate website, but he's using and kind of translating Dramatica principles into something that's more user-friendly for screenwriters and for movie makers. So he had been he'd been uploading some videos to the site where he discusses some aspect of Dramatica. And so a fellow user in some sense, in so many words, volunteered to begin hosting his, a separate series, just demonstrating how to take the Dramatica elements that would be calculated when you use the software, and how to work them into a story of your own, which is basically the crux. This is the recipe, but you'd want to watch somebody actually take the recipe and actually cook the meal. So, especially with a complex theory like Dramatica. So, in one of the videos, they were talking about conflict, and it got into a funny discussion. There was a question posted by somebody following this video series. Well, there are two conflicts. There are 2 points conflicting with each other, and they both have values. They both seem correct and justifiable in their own respect, but you have 2 of them, and they can't coexist. So eventually, the character must decide one over the other, and it's funny how this was. I'll call him the host of this video series. He kept saying, "Well, no, he doesn't really. He chooses, but the conflict still remains." No, the conflict wouldn't. They would say, no, the conflict wouldn't remain. He chose one over the other, and the host was saying, and I see the point. The host was saying, no. The character may choose one over the other, but the conflict still remains. He still suffers the consequences of taking one over the other. And I can't remember exactly how, but the funny part of this is when the host said, "These people aren't real characters. I mean, these characters aren't real people. The character is a puppet. Think of a puppet on George Lucas's hand. And these people aren't really here. We're watching them, but they don't really exist. It's George Lucas manipulating a puppet." And maybe you get the point that I'm trying to make. It's like, I guess he was trying to say that the people making those arguments, seemingly confused, trying to say, well, they choose one over the other, don't they? Well, the conflict still remains. You have to take a step back and recognize this is the author telling a story. It's coming from his own mind, and he's telling a story. I thought that was pretty funny, especially with the puppet and so forth. All right, so I've explained that. So backtrack to what I just read, which is the critical flaw and the unique ability, and this thing that I just mentioned, I just reiterated. You have these different levels. There are different resolutions of this one conflict that you're in, or that through line is confronted with through the course of the movie. And it's like it's compressed. If you think about it one way, each through line has a central conflict, but yet that conflict is stretched out so you can see many different levels of the conflict. And so I mentioned the different levels in that earlier video of mine, that 5.5-hour video of mine. At the bottom level, the element level, they use the term problem, because you have to use different terminology, even though it's all one conflict. When you spread it out, just for the sake of understanding what level of the problem you're dealing with, they just use different terminology for each level. So at the bottom element level, it's problem and solution and symptom and response. That simply means that you have a quad of 4, and 2 of them, or these two of them diagonally, one would be the problem, one would be the solution. The other would be a symptom, and then the other one would be a response to that symptom. And I might as well say it now before I forget. I mentioned before in the other video that the main between the main character and the impact character, one of them will change at the end. Will change his or her attitude about how to deal with his personal problem by the end of the story. And the other one, therefore, has to remain steadfast. And that's not just a quirk of storytelling. That's actually because the mind of the film teller, or the storyteller, is trying to communicate, this is the better way of going about it, and this is not so good. Because in some sense, even though the main character and impact character are confronted with different problems on the surface, deep down you can see a similarity between them. Thematically, you can see a similarity between the two problems that the two conflicts that they're facing, and how they deal with them, how differently they deal with them. One prefers to deal with them externally, and one prefers to deal with them internally. And so one decides to change at the end of the story and in the climax of the story, and the other one decides, no, I've been on the correct path, I've been dealing with this correctly, and I just have to stick with how I've always been doing it. And then it may resolve the conflicts, it may not resolve the conflicts. That's for us to discover at the end, during the climax, and then live through in the aftermath. So anyway, so here's the interesting point. It defines the problem, what the problem actually is for each through line. There are 4 through lines. There is one for the impact character, there's one for the main character, there's one for relationships between characters, and then there's a through line for objectively what everybody is concerned with, the storyline that everybody is concerned with. And so, for example, in Star Wars, the objective story that everybody's involved with is basically the rebels trying to get secret information, vital information, to their headquarters somewhere in order to defeat the Empire. And the Empire is chasing after them and trying to prevent them from accomplishing the goal. That makes the rebels the protagonists because they're trying to pursue this goal of getting the vital information to their headquarters, and the Empire acts as the antagonist, trying to prevent them from accomplishing the goal. And that's the Dramatica. Those are using the Dramatica definitions. Very clear-cut and elegantly simple and elegantly defined. So in the objective story, there's a problem. Dramatica, the software, would tell you, or you can you can define it, and then that your choosing of what the problem is for one of these through lines helps to have algorithms in the software calculate other features. There are over 70-something aspects in the story form that Dramatica spits out. You can, as you modify, as you choose certain things, it calculates and figures out what other things have to be set up in the story, what values have to be there in the other story, other part of the story. So, so the objective story would have a certain value as its problem, and so the character, the main character or impact character, whichever one changes in the climax near the end of the story, would match, that value would match the problem of the objective story. I'll give you an example. I'll just throwing it out there. How about help is the problem in the objective story? Help could be a problem. You can perhaps think of ways in which helping or providing help causes more conflict. So the objective story involving all the characters would have help. The characters when they help, it just creates more problems and more conflict. The main character, let's say the main character changes. The main character, because the main character changes, his own personal problem would also be identified as help. He may have his own, now it has to be, personal problem of his. They would take the help value and apply it to his own life. Like, objectively, think of some scenario where a lot of characters are engaged in this wider scope conflict or scenario, and help is causing conflict. Well, help provides a different conflict, superficially, on the surface level. Help is also causing conflict in the main character's personal life. It wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be portrayed in the same way as it would be for all the characters in the objective story, but it's still a scenario in his private life that is, in some way, having help cause more conflict. I hope you catch what I mean. I'm basically saying that his value of help causing problems in his personal life is not related necessarily directly with the objective story and that scenario in which help is causing conflict. Okay, so whichever one, the main character or the impact character, whichever one is the one that changes how they deal with their personal problem, that value, whether it be help or pursue or prevent or I don't know what else, hinder, whatever, will match. It be help and help. And so I also mentioned that there's problem and for each through line. There's problem and solution, and then there's symptom and response. Now, symptom is what the character or the whoever it is in the one of the through lines thinks of as the problem. It's the focus of their attention. It's like the cold. There's a virus that is actually the true problem of your sniffles and so forth, and the sniffles are the symptom. So you could be so your focus could be towards trying to deal with these sniffles, but you're not really taking care of the true problem itself, which is the virus. So you'd have a response, you'd blow your nose. So at this element level, there's problem, solution, symptom, and response. The problem would be the virus. The solution would be something that deals with the virus directly, and then the symptom would be the sniffles, and the response would be blowing your nose or something. And until you take care of the virus, you're just going to keep having these symptoms. They're just going to keep existing until you take care of the actual problem. So you may notice where I'm headed with this. You have the main character and impact character. One character, either one, is the steadfast character and therefore remains the steadfast character. I think I have the correct way of dealing with my personal problem. I'm going to keep doing it, and even in the climax, I'm going to stick with this way of dealing with my problem. The changed character would have a problem. They both start off with problems. The main character will have the same opinion. I deal with my personal problem this way. However, this other character deals with it a different way, and then over time decides, oh, maybe this other character had the right idea all along, and then shifts towards the other character. And then at the very end decides to actually shift and deal with his or her personal problem in a way that's different from the way he had been doing it. Now, it's modified slightly because the main character is the I perspective, and the impact character, by definition, is not a character that the audience, as I, main character, should be slipping into. and that's a problem. There's a caution when the Dramatica has these analysis sessions hosted by one of the two co-founders of the theory. Chris Huntley emphasizes that we are seeing the story, whatever it is, through the main character's eyes. We're not seeing it through the impact character's eyes. We're seeing it through the main character's eyes, the main character's eye in the story. And we're just seeing this objectified other person representing an alternative way of dealing with things. So you're feeling it through the main character. I hope you can. I've said that like 20 times already, but it's an important point. So you shouldn't really be slipping into the impact character's point of view. You're watching, you're literally observing the impact character's behavior. And that's why a lot of times you have leading late, some kind of romance or relationship develop. Even in a really macho movie, you can have a relationship form, or they have relationships formed in these, or depicted in these movies, which may even seem out of place sometimes. You can also see it in buddy movies. The sex and gender doesn't make any difference. It's that relationship that forms, and that's a crucial part. One is likely to be the main character, and one is likely to be the impact character. It's serving the same purpose as if you had, Sandra Bullock and Chris Evans or somebody getting together. Same idea. It's that function of the story that's being fulfilled. So, all right, so I've explained that there's problem and symptom, and then you go one level above element and you get to variation. Let me skip on variation for a moment, because that's where I'm going to explain this thing that I've forgotten to talk about. Above the variation level, you have type, and that's defined in the resolution of the conflict there is defined as, or termed, concern. Concern. And then the one above that is domain. So it's basically, if you take the core conflict and you stretch it out amidst these 4 different levels, it's in the class level, it's domain, and then below that in the type level, it's concern. Below that in the variation level, it's issue, and then in the bottom element level, it's problem, and then you also have a symptom adjacent to it. Now, there is a way of identifying in the quad at the element level the location. If you know the problem, you can calculate where in your head. It's very easy. You can calculate where the symptom. It has to be diagonal. Must be diagonal to the problem. It can't be directly below or directly next to the problem. It has to be diagonal. I'm sorry. That's the solution. The symptom can't be diagonal to the problem, because that's where the solution is. It has to be either, if you see my earlier video, you will understand, either be in a dependent relationship or companion relationship. I believe that depends on other factors related to this top level. Whether a character is a doer, or that through line, that whether the character is a doer or a beer. Something like that. My mind is a little foggy on that right now. Okay, so one level above that, you have something in addition to what I mentioned about stretching that conflict. I forgot to mention in the last video, in addition to issue, you have a quad in the variation level of 4 units, and one of them will be the issue. And there will be another one that's called the critical flaw, and one that's called the critical flaw and what was that again? The critical flaw and unique ability. And those terms change, but it's the same principle. The terms change. Well, I'll get into why the terms change between the through lines. But here's the basic principle that, if I can explain this well, you have a main and impact character, and in addition to the issue for each of the for the main character, and then there's an issue for the impact character, one will have adjacent to the issue will be the critical flaw and the unique ability. And there's there's an algorithm that you can do in your mind. I'm a little rusty on this, where it's you look at the collection of four and forget which one it is, the critical flaw or unique ability. One of them won't be found here in the quad directly beneath, as you would expect, directly beneath in that quarter of the entire periodic table. In the periodic table, there are four at the top level, and one is assigned to each of the four through lines. And so defining that conflict for that particular through line, you have to continue below that unit at the top level. There are 4 units in the top level. You have to go drill down from that unit down all the way. You don't go sideways or whatever. You go directly down and identify what the problem is in each of the levels. However, it's for unique ability or critical flaw, something like that. You can do it in your head, although the software helps calculate it. The quad that's below, but within that domain that you're talking about, that you're defining for that through line, it won't be found there. It'll be found in a different quad on that level, but it'll be found in a different quad and has something to do with the main and impact character, like sharing. As I remember, the impression I remember is that they're somehow sharing, or one is flip-flopped, something like that. So, sorry, that's all I remember. The software itself can easily calculate it. Now, let me define what unique ability and critical flaw are, and that's much easier to explain. I should also mention, actually, that you have 2 other ones that work on the same principle, but they're different terms. Same idea, but different terms. So you have 4 through lines. 2 of them are story through lines. You have the objective story, which is the overall thing involving everybody, and you have the subjective story, which involves the relationships between the characters in the overall story. And then you have, so those are the 2 story through lines, and then you have the 2 personal character storylines, which are the main character through line and the impact character through line. Now, for the main character through line, there's a critical flaw and a unique ability, and for the impact character, there's a unique ability and critical flaw. Now, that same principle will go into the subjective through line and the objective through line, only those 2 aren't called unique ability and critical flaw. Those are, each one of those 2 have an inhibitor, and I forget the term, but it basically means, I want to call it an exciter. It's something that moves, it escalates the story, escalates the feeling of the story going forward towards its climax. So think about it as a slowing, like a brake and a gas pedal. That's the way Chris Huntley likes to describe it. One, and I forget what the opposite of an inhibitor is, but the inhibitor is like the brake. As you're watching the story, you're following along, you stick in this value in there, and it gives the audience a sense that things are slowing down, like they're stopping, like you would in a car. You hit the brake and it stops. And one purpose that this serves is that you could stop it temporarily so that you could go to a different through line or a different part of the story. And the audience won't be in that tension, won't feel as much of a tension when you shift to a different part of the story to tell. And then when you want to go back to telling that through line, you go back to that through line and continue. You want to hit the gas, and it's called something like the accelerator, and that will give the audience a sense, oh wow, as we're going back to this other through line that we departed temporarily, we're feeling this urge and tension. Let's get going, let's get going. And it's not necessarily that the characters will say that, but the audience will feel that. So that explains, I'll just call it accelerator and inhibitor. Then in the for the main character and impact character, something similar, is there the similar idea but different terminology. Think of the accelerator as the unique ability now, and the critical flaw, the brake pedal, the inhibitor is now called the critical flaw. Now, there's a bit of, well, all right, as you may imagine, the unique ability is something good. It's a unique ability that that character has. In the main character through line, there's a unique ability, and the impact character, there's a unique ability. And there's a critical flaw. Each of them has a critical flaw as well. Now, the main character's unique ability is specifically defined as that value or that trait, and Dramatica gives this to you in the story form. That unique trait that enables the main character to help resolve the conflict in the objective story through line. And the critical flaw is the thing that hinders that ability. However, the impact character has a unique ability. That unique ability is a specific trait that helps the impact character make an impact, an impression upon the main character personally. That's the function of the impact character, to coax, whether consciously or indirectly, to make an impression on the main character to think, well, maybe I should go about it the way the impact character is dealing with his or her personal problem. Should I change and do it that way, or should I continue and remain steadfast in dealing with it the way I've always been dealing with it? And the critical flaw for the impact character is that trait that hinders the impact character from being able to impact the main character. That should be straightforward. All right. So going on from that, we have two. I have comedy, information, entertainment, and drama, which I've already explained in the earlier video. I don't think I need to continue mentioning that here. Don't remember why I put that down, but I know I've explained that you can have the 4 classes, and I guess I wanted to elaborate upon that. Okay, so you have 4 classes at the top. They are universe, physics, psychology, and mind. Now, if you're looking at it like this, as a quad, you're looking down at the periodic table. You have universe in the upper left. I'll do it in reverse because it seems that apparently this camera reverses things. You have universe in the upper left and mind in the lower right. Those 2 are states. The nature of that conflict, when you're going to assign the 4 through lines, main character, impact character, objective story, subjective story, you're going to assign those 4, each of those 4, to each of these 4 that I just mentioned. And so you have 2 in a diagonal form. You have universe and mind. Those are states. The nature of the conflict is that the conflict revolves around something being stuck. And the other two, physics and psychology, those are processes. And the nature of the conflicts in those are that something is undergoing a process that's causing conflict. So I'll give an example of a difference between, I can give an example of a difference for all of them. So a conflict in universe would be that something is simply stuck, like the house is possessed by a demon or something. It's that that demon possession is stuck to the house, and that's the nature of the conflict. The nature of the conflict doesn't really involve what the demon is doing. You could tell it that way, but the nature of the conflict is that the demon is possessing the house. So aside from that, you could have a story like in Raiders of the Lost Ark. You have people Nazis chasing after, trying to obtain the Lost Ark, and Indiana Jones is trying to prevent them. That's another good example, by the way, of, just like in The Empire Strikes Back, both written by Lawrence Kasdan, those are two examples of two independent stories, each with their own story form woven together. So if you've ever watched Raiders of the Lost Ark and it seemed like there may be two stories, or it seemed like he changes to some degree and remains steadfast in other degrees, it's because there are two stories interwoven together. One story is the Nazis as protagonists, and I will use the precise Dramatica definition of a protagonist. Doesn't mean the main character. It means whoever is pursuing the goal in the objective story. From that point of view, the Nazis doesn't mean that they're good, doesn't mean that you side with them. It means that they are the ones pursuing the goal of obtaining the Ark. And Indiana Jones, in that story, there are two of them woven together. In that one, Indiana Jones is the antagonist because he's trying to prevent the Nazis from obtaining the Ark. And he tries to hinder them and tries to stop them. That's the goal. He's not so much trying to get the Ark himself. He's trying to stop them from obtaining the Ark and going through with their ceremony to release its power. The other storyline. Okay, so I'll use this as a good example to define to explain what defines a complete story form. A complete story form, by definition in Dramatica terms, is where you have all four through lines fully expressed. So in that arc through line, oh yes, now I remember. I remember what the other one is. It takes a lot of explaining here. In the arc, let's just call it the arc story, the protagonist, the objective story is all about the Nazis acquiring the Ark and going to this island to test out its power, to open its power, and Indiana Jones is trying to stop them. That's the objective story. That involves all the characters. Now, the main character would be Indiana Jones. So there's a good example of where the protagonists are the Nazis and the main character is somebody separate from the protagonist. It's Indiana Jones. The movie The Terminator, it's been argued back and forth. Jim Hall at one point pointed out that in one of his blog articles that Kyle Reese is the antagonist because he represents preventing. There was some explanation. It made sense, sort of, and that Sarah Connor is the protagonist. It seems more likely, it seems more comfortable to me that in that story that Kyle Reese is the protagonist because he's pursuing the goal of protecting Sarah. And then I think about it and I think, the Terminator is trying to is doing all these different things, locating where Sarah Connor is, going to Sarah Connor, trying to gun down Sarah Connor, and doing all these different things. And then I think Kyle Reese is trying to prevent the Terminator from exterminating Sarah. And I'm thinking, is the Terminator the protagonist and Sarah, and Kyle Reese is the antagonist? And it sometimes it can be twisty. It can be kind of confusing. I'll sidestep for a moment and mention that when I was getting into Dramatica, a lot of it makes sense instinctively for me, partly because I had been studying it for at least 12 years before getting into the Dramatica theory. I mean, I'd been understanding film before even getting to Dramatica theory. I wondered, in a James Bond movie, typical James Bond movie, the villain, like Goldfinger or is it Goldfinger? Yeah, Goldfinger. I was trying not to say Goldmember. That's a different movie. Goldfinger has this plot, and it's all figured out, and he's trying to achieve the plot, and James Bond is sent in to stop him from achieving the goal. Now, wouldn't that make Goldfinger the protagonist and James Bond the antagonist? Because it seems like through the story, all this effort, you see all this effort on the part of the villain trying to achieve this master plan, and James Bond is sent in to try and stop him from achieving that master plan. And even not, I don't know if the other co-founder of the Dramatica theory would still agree with me, but she did voice that earlier. It's Chris Huntley and Melanie Ann Phillips, and she had been saying that some time ago she wrote in an article that same thing that I said, that you see all this effort on the part of the villain to execute and achieve this goal, and James Bond comes in and tries to stop him from doing it. It seems like he's pursuing the goal, and James Bond is the antagonist trying to prevent it. So they had, Dramatica has, I don't know if they still have it, but I think it's Dramatica.com. No, it's, well, anyway, there was a forum devoted to Dramatica for Dramatica users to ask questions and discuss Dramatica. And so I posted a question, and Chris answered me back. I'd grown up with Transformers. Remember that, those of you who know Transformers, back in the mid to late 80s, remember that G1 cartoon, Optimus Prime and Megatron and all the other ones? Those are wonderful characters. And they had the episodes skillfully did a cliffhanger. It was event, quickly moving. And I thought those were simply straightforward. You know, there were stories told elegantly, simply, and straightforwardly. And I asked on the forum, okay, you have Megatron. These episodes typically start off in an archetypal style. You have, say, Megatron finds a new rich quantity of oil reserve deep in the earth somewhere, and he figures out some way of tapping into that resource. And Optimus Prime gets wind of it, and the Autobots go and try and stop him from doing it. You know, it's a tip of one of these archetypal setups that would happen in the G1 Transformers 1980s cartoon. Well, wouldn't that make Megatron the protagonist? Because he has this goal. He wants to drain the resources and utilize them, and the Autobots come in as the antagonists to prevent him from achieving it. And Chris Huntley typed a response back to something to the effect of, well, which one are you rooting more for? And that shows the importance of defining your goal well. I guess it's a combination of how you feel, like, are you cheering for them at the end? Are you happy at the end that the goal was achieved? And sometimes the goal, sometimes in these dramatic analysis sessions, there's a question about how you should define the goal of the objective story. Like, for example, in Rocky, they analyze that movie, and you can go to Dramatica.com to watch their analysis. There's a video. That's about the time when they did Rocky. There were a few episodes before that, but that's about the time when they, in addition to audio recording and uploading audio files of their sessions, these sessions could go on. They're very entertaining. They could go on for like 2 hours. It was about that point when they were also uploading video of their analysis sessions. Rocky in the first movie doesn't win the boxing. I guess I shouldn't say spoiler alert because I already blew it, but he doesn't win at the end. His opponent, Apollo Creed, wins, but yet when you did the Dramatica analysis and the computer software calculated it, the story form that they calculate, all the values matched, and it indicated that the objective story was a success. And so when you see it a second time, you notice the emphasis wasn't on Rocky trying to win over Apollo Creed. The emphasis was on something that he says right around somewhere in the third act, well, really the fourth act in Dramatica speak, but as the climax is approaching, he's lying in bed with Adrian, and he says, he may even say, I'm not even worried about winning. He says, I just want to go the distance, and if I'm still standing after 15 rounds with Apollo Creed, then people will know that I'm not just a bum from the streets. I think that's the goal. It's surviving and just withstanding and being in the ring with Apollo and making a good show against Apollo, who's the world championship boxer. It's not necessarily winning. So in that sense, it's a success. It is a success at the end of the movie. Apollo wins, and even then, it's a draw. There was a decision made, and Apollo was decided to be the winner. But that was, and in fact, that's in the background. You see the main character smiling, or being joyful and hugging Adrian almost in front, literally in front of Apollo, jumping up and down and with his arms up. Yay, I won. That's not even really important. You hear the announcer say it in the background, Apollo Creed, and in the forefront you see Rocky and Adrian hugging. And that demonstrates a feature in Dramatica. There are two different things. There's the objective story, whether it's success or failure, and there's the main character judgment, which is really connected with how the audience feels at the end. It's specifically defined as, has the main character resolved his personal conflict? And so it's a success, and good, because it's a success because he survived the 15 rounds and he's gained respect. He's no longer deemed as a bum on the street. And it's a good judgment for the main character because it has something to do with Adrian. Well, frankly, you see them both smiling and hugging. I mean, it seems like it seems like he's in a happy place mentally. He seems to have resolved his personal issue. I forget exactly what it is right at the moment. So that's a good example of where Dramatica clearly defines these terms and concepts in the structure of a film. And that's one of the reasons I appreciate and value Dramatica so much. All right, so anyway, backing up. So the protagonist and antagonist. All right, so going way back. I guess you have to define what the goal is in the objective story. Okay, going further back, I was talking about how Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of those stories. Empire Strikes Back is the same way, where you have two stories woven together. So I would say that you have the Ark story and you have the Belloc story. In the Ark story, as I had been talking before I so rudely interrupted myself, um, you have each being its own story form, each being its own separate story. And a story form is defined as all four through lines being expressed. In the arc story, the objective story is involving the Nazis as protagonists trying to obtain the ark, and Indiana Jones trying to prevent them from accomplishing that. And the main character is Indiana Jones. The impact character, and I'll skip over the subjective story, the impact character shifts. It at some level, yes, at some level, it's the arc. It's the arc, and Sala is expressing an aspect of the arc as impact character. And you also have Marion Ravenwood. Marion Ravenwood definitely changes. She's the changed character. Excuse me, and if I have that right, it depends. Indiana Jones. The premise, yes, the premise of it, the argument that the impact character is making in the arc story is that this arc is something very powerful and not something to be really fooled around with. And as a matter of fact, Sala at one point early on says, if it is at Tennis, I forget the exact wording he uses, but he says, it's not something to be messed around with. And so towards the end of the story, that's why Indiana Jones says, look away, cover your eyes, Marion, cover your eyes, because he has changed. I have this right. He's changed, and now he understands under the influence of the arc via Sala and to some extent, was it Marcus Brody? At the beginning of the story, the power of the arc. Don't fool around with it. At the beginning of the story, when Indiana Jones, I believe it's Marcus Brody, I'm pretty sure, when Marcus Brody enters his home and he says, look, this search for the ark is something like nothing you've ever gone after before. Just be careful. And Indiana Jones says, you know me, I'm careful. And he throws his gun onto the couch or wherever. And so Indiana Jones starts off being confident that it's simply an artifact, and he's not into religious, he's not into this hocus pocus and whatever. It's just an ark. And so the argument is made through the arc itself, via these other two characters, Sala and Marcus Brody, that this is an important artifact. It's connected with God, and you should be very careful. It's a source of enormous power. And even in the aftermath, after the climax, when he's meeting with these government officials, and they say, well, it's being stored away for safekeeping, or, it's being handled by top men. That's how they express it. It's being handled by top men. And then it cuts to, I almost said George Lucas. It cuts to Indiana Jones walking down the steps with Marion. And the first thing he says when he's walking down the steps is, the fools, they don't know what they're dealing with. Or they don't know what they've got. And then Marion says, well, I know what I've got. And they go happily ever after. Till, of course, they go happily ever after until the next adventure. Because Temple of Doom, the next movie, actually is a prequel movie that takes place before that. Anyway, that's one storyline. So that has all four through lines. And the other story form has 4 through lines. It's the Belloc thing. It's the Belloc storyline. And again, Indiana Jones and Belloc. Now this time, in the objective story, Belloc is involved with taking artifacts from Indiana Jones in this chase. And that's why it seems like when you watch Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's like they're 2 separate stories in some sense. You have the Nazis pursuing the goal, and then you have Belloc hooked on. And that's why it seems to shift between the Nazis and Belloc, even though they're both engaged in finding the Ark. And that's also why at the beginning of the movie, there's that whole introduction where Indiana Jones is trying to grab this artifact. It has nothing to do with the Ark itself. It's some other adventure. You enter the movie with him on this other adventure, and then it climaxes with Belloc taking the artifact from him and saying, "You see, there's nothing that you can possess, which I cannot take from you." And that is not simply introducing Indiana Jones. That's introducing that story form, that storyline. That's not the Nazi story form. That's that other story form. It's the one that's the rivalry between 2 archaeologists, Belloc and Indiana Jones. And then after that, then he gets on the plane, he gets back, and you see him as professor, and then come the government agents, and he's talking to them about how the Nazis are on the search for the Ark, this quest for the Ark. They're introducing both storylines, one after the other, and then it switches back and forth. Now, I'll get back to that story form of the rivalry between 2 archaeologists, because there's a crucial point I'm embarrassed to have not mentioned before. Now I'll mention here. It's hard to tell actually which one is the protagonist and which one is the antagonist. Anyway, you have that story form. You have them also as main character and impact character, Belloc and Indiana Jones. And there's a moment in there that you see in all sorts of other, a slew of other movies. And once you recognize it, it's funny because now when you see it in a movie, that moment, that special "you and I are just alike" moment in these movies, you recognize why the author put it in there. Now, there's a moment in Indiana Jones, specifically in the Belloc and Indiana Jones storyline, where the 2 of them meet in a tavern or a bar or something, and perhaps in one of the best expressions of this principle, Belloc tells Indiana Jones, "You and I are alike. We're nothing alike." No, we're both archaeologists, and he phrases it in some way that compares both of them. They're both alike in a certain way. There is a specific structural reason for having that. Remember, I said ultimately the through lines, when you match them up, when you match each through line with a class at the top level. At the top level, there's a class level. There are 4 units, and you assign each through line to a different unit. And so, it's one of the simpler algorithms that you can do in your head when you're figuring out the story form for your story. You're applying this whole periodic table and trying to calculate the story form values. This is one of the easiest ones to do. The main character and impact character have to occupy units at that class level that are directly diagonal to each other. That's the main and impact character. And then the objective and subjective story through lines have to be in a diagonal relationship as well. And that's not just something they made up. That's because for example, main and impact character, those 2 have to be both in states of either states of conflict or processes that are that involve conflict. That they they're either in conflicts involving being states or conflicts involving or revolving around a process. One is internal and one is external. And because the upper two, universe and physics, are external types of conflict in the outer world, and mind and psychology are conflicts that are involved in the inner world. And so, just looking at the diagram simply, you can figure out if they're, for example, both states. You have the main and impact character. One is in universe and one is in mind. They are both involved in a conflict that's a type of being stuck. It's a conflict that derives from the fact that there's something stuck. One of them is stuck in the external world, a conflict that's related to the external world, and one of them is stuck in a conflict that's related to the inner world. So, for example, you would have one character, you have the main and impact characters. One of them would be dealing with a conflict related to being stuck, like maybe the type of body the person has, or stuck in some kind of reputation or something. And then he would be paired with this other character who's stuck in a certain frame of mind, and he has to become unstuck from that certain mentality that's causing the conflict. And likewise, you have two processes. You have one that's involved in a conflict related to an external physics process, namely chasing after something or learning something or trying to figure out or understand something, and or trying to achieve or obtain something. Then the other one is more psychological, but it's still a process of rearranging the mind, just as the process here, physics, is a process rearranging the universe. So these are involved in something being stuck, and these are involved in the activities or processes. So on some level, Belloc and Indiana Jones, Belloc was right. He and Indiana Jones are similar in that they're both either in states or in processes. However, one is in an external conflict and one is in an internal conflict. Now, if you want to understand that better, perhaps you'd want to watch romantic comedies, because I'm guessing a lot of those are buddy comedy movies, because those will define them very, very well. You get two obvious characters that are paired with each other. One is going to be the main character, one is going to be the impact character. They're both going to be processes or both states or both processes. And one is going to be dealing with a conflict in the outside world, one is going to be dealing with a conflict in the inside world, the mental world. And so that it's nicknamed in Dramatica the "you and I are just alike" moment. It's something that cues the audience in to say, oh, these are the two characters that are to be compared together. I shouldn't do that gesture because it seems like they're fighting, but these are the two characters that are compared and in some sense related. These are the main and impact characters. That's a cue. So Chris Huntley said that he probably still has somewhere. He has a montage. I may have seen it sometime on the computer. He has a montage of these same clips of these same moments throughout lots of movies. You just see them one after another, and after a while it becomes funny because it's so structural. The pattern is so clear after a while. You just see them one after the other, involving different characters, different movies, but you see that same moment. You and I are just alike, over and over and over and over. So you can tell, you can bet that that was an easy one for me, and it was very intuitive for me to write in my Madonna screenplay, my Madonna comedy screenplay. That was the gist. You have Joe and Madonna meeting, and then there has to be that you and I are alike moment where I forget how it was, but how I arranged it, how I assigned them was that I had Madonna. I switched them around, and I talked about that earlier in the previous Dramatica video. But I ultimately had Madonna in situation, or universe, I should say universe. The terminology changes. I had her in universe, and him as the main character, her as the impact character, because I'm figuring the audience would relate more to him than to her, and it's about the audience as through the main character experiencing this weird world of celebrityhood. And so the impact character, remember, we're not jumping into Madonna's personality, we're not jumping into her mind as an independent character on her own. We're observing the whole movie personally. I'm not talking about, she may play a role in the objective story the objective story changed several times. I had different scenarios for the objective story, but in terms of main and impact character, instinctively, even before I watched Dramatica, I had this sense, the sense of main and impact character. The main character is Joe, and we're seeing it through his eyes. We're experiencing the movie through his eyes. And this other character, Madonna, we're looking at her. We're not delving into her mind. We're just observing her. And she is making an impact on us because of her lifestyle, the way she dresses, her entourage, her I said lifestyle already, just her behavior and so forth. I'm not saying that this is the totality of her character, because over time, that's the whole point of the story. Over time, Joe learns more about her as a person rather than just as a celebrity. But her impact on us, and therefore on Joe, is her celebrityhood. And the two are from totally different worlds. So that type of conflict revolves around her being stuck in her celebrityhood. It's not a process. She's not involved in a kind of conflict that involves what she's doing, or what she's not really learning. The conflict isn't revolved around. The conflict is not involved with her learning anything in particular or understanding. It's just her nature as a celebrity. It's making an impact. So she would be in universe, stuck in universe, and therefore he would be stuck in a certain mindset or mentality, and that defines his conflict. And the way I had it, I sometimes couldn't decide whether she would be the one as impact character changing her attitude or he changes his attitude. That shifted back and forth sometimes. In fact, I had at one point, it's interesting, again, before I learned anything that Dramatica even existed, I had this instinctive moment to put in a bit of dialogue where Madonna tells Joe, based on her personal experience, if you quit dwelling on the past and think of the present, you would have made more progress in life. And I worked in, at some point, after working with Dramatica, after being introduced to the theory and working with it in different arrangements, I had him, I had him dwelling on memory as his conflict, focus of his conflict, because of the way I arranged the through lines and the periodic table. And so I had him wondering if he had been more of a success in a previous incarnation, like he's a reincarnation of somebody famous, and that fame, that concept of fame, relates to her being famous. And I had in that version of it a concern that does he really have what it takes to be famous? It would comfort him a lot if he knew that he had been somebody famous, if he still retained the soul. And I had Kabbalistic elements incorporated into this. If he knew that he had the same soul as his previous incarnation, that was somebody famous. And I had Madonna thinking in the present terms, and I was trying to characterize her accurately. I could change her to a fictional character, but I was basing it on, I was using the real person as a model. I had her telling him, well, if you, because I had, okay, I explained this principle in my previous video. There's a certain algorithm that defines if you know the concern of one character, that would help you identify the concern and conflict in the other character. So if I had his concern in the upper left being memory, automatically her concern in universe would be more specifically in past. And that past is her impact upon him. Her concern about it makes an impact on him. And I can't remember how I illustrated that, but I remember her saying, I remember having her say, well, if you focused on the present rather than worried about your memories of what may or may not have been the past of your soul, you would have progressed further in life. And so forth. So, all right. So let me move on. I think I talked enough about that. All right. So here, let me, without saying uhs and ums, I'm just going to edit this. Okay. So after that long, I don't want to say long-winded, after that elaborate explanation, this parts 4 and 5, or points 4 and 5, are something very easy to say. It's you spend Act 1 in your story showing the bond, or forming the bond between the audience and the main character. The main character isn't necessarily somebody likable, but in Act 1 you want to show enough of the, you want to reveal enough of the main character's traits and also unique abilities that will help resolve the whole thing, the whole story, in that first act. And it doesn't have to be likable, but the audience has to understand the main character. And then Act 4, because as I said before, there are 4 acts really in a story. And that, okay, I was a scammer, I'm sure. Okay, so then in Act 4, each through line is split into quarters, and the story is really, any well-told film is really split into quarters. Act 4 should be the ultimate confrontation in the objective story, between the protagonist and antagonist. And I have here the crux of the whole story conflict and an action or decision which illustrates the author's argument on how to best handle the dilemma or imply what should have been done. And that's number 5. I skipped over number 3, which is a point of Hitchcock, that you show the definition of suspense. I think it's something like a calamity or something. If you have an explosion, if you show people and there's an explosion, that's one way of telling it, but there's a different experience the audience feels if you show the audience of people at a table, for example, and then you show the bomb. They're not aware of the bomb's existence, and it's under the table. You show the characters, and then you show a bomb that is about to explode. They don't know about it, so that instantly causes suspense. You reveal something that the characters aren't aware of. And so that was number 3. I've covered up, and then I also covered number 5, and then I covered the 6, you and I are alike, and then 7, each character has a distinctive voice in terms of dialogue. That simply says that you want to have, preferably, each character's name beginning with a different letter of the alphabet. That's just a trick that has nothing to do with Dramatica, and that's simply a trick that I learned in screenwriting, and especially in those text-based screenwriting software applications where you don't want to confuse, you don't want to have like 2 or 3 characters' names beginning with the same letter. You want to vary the names. And more so, you want to have each character's voice sound differently. You want them to seem more independent from each other. For example, in Star Trek, you have Scotty and Kirk and Spock, and you have Kirk, Spock, Scotty, and McCoy. Now, McCoy will be concerned about certain things, and he will voice it in a very pensive or very emotional manner. And Spock, even though you're not familiar with Star Trek necessarily, you know Spock, he will phrase things in a more controlled, logical, rational, calm manner. It's all about the manner in which the character delivers dialogue, and so you want to write the dialogue accordingly. Kirk will seem more brave, more like a conscience of the whole story, and Scotty will talk in more technical terms. They each have their own voice. And even in real life, you may notice one friend will tend to say things in a certain way, and another friend will tend to be concerned about other things and voice his concerns in a different way. That's all that's saying. You want the audience to easily differentiate between the characters. And so you'd want to write the dialogue accordingly, and even the behavior of the characters in a certain way that differentiates him or her from the other characters. Number 8, button at the end of the scene. That simply means you don't just end the scene. Like even in Monty Python's Flying Circus, sometimes if they didn't know how to end the skit, they would simply have something just fall down. But you want to have some kind of button at the end of the scene, and that's a technical term. I've seen it in screenwriting books. The button, I'm trying to figure out some way of phrasing it. It kind of eases you into the next scene. Doesn't have to, plot-wise, lead you into the next scene. It can foreshadow what happens in the following scene. For example, the button at the end of a scene could have a character simply saying, well, we've got to find somebody to help us. And that could be the button that leads you. It's like a segue. It segues into the next scene. It could also be something that is funny or cheers you up or leaves you with a good feeling at the end of the scene, or maybe a downer at the end of a scene. It's a mood, in that sense, it's a mood affecting thing. So that's what the button serves, or it could encapsulate what's happened in the scene. It could sum up what's happened in the scene. This is the basic thrust. This is the point of the scene in the button at the end of it. So I think I've run through all that I need to talk about. I don't think there are other things I'd want to talk about in this edition, so I will end it right now. If you like this, if you want to see more content, please go through my other videos and consider liking this video. I'm trying to grow my channel, and please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Before you get going, I wanted to mention an example. I was about to watch somebody's first reaction view of Jaws, and before I get into that reminded me there's an excellent example of a contagonist and a protagonist, and an antagonist and guardian, so forth. I've already mentioned Star Wars. When the two co-founders of Dramatica, Chris Huntley and Melanie Ann Phillips, were developing the theory, they originally had four archetypal figures. They had protagonist and antagonist. Those two are clearly against each other, or their counterparts. And Obi-Wan Kenobi was the helper, providing aid and voicing the conscience of why it's so important to achieve the goal. And so they had Luke Skywalker as protagonist, they had Darth Vader as antagonist, and they had Obi-Wan Kenobi being the guardian character, providing help to the rebellion cause. But this was empty, and they were confused because the theory so far seemed to work on a principle of fours, and there seemed to be a thing missing. Who was the counterpart to Obi-Wan Kenobi? Because Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader were counterparts to each other. Obi-Wan Kenobi, what's here? So they realized, no. Darth Vader is not the antagonist. Darth Vader would be over here. And in fact, there's a pairing if you watch A New Hope and some of the other movies. They portray them explicitly as having had a past together. I won't go into spoilers, but there's a lightsaber duel in the 1977 original movie, and there are other pairings related to that. So at the element level, this is what define. So these archetypal positions, protagonist, antagonist, guardian, and what they had to make up, which is the term contagonist, those are superficial labelings for what's really going on in the element level. As I mentioned before in the earlier video, the 5.5 hour video, at the bottom level you have like 256 or something. You have 64, I think, different elements, and they're actually sectioned off into larger quads of elements. The lower left quad, directly below obtaining, which is all the way at the top class level, you go all the way down. You go from obtaining all the way down, which is under physics. Go in. There are 4 units. Physics is in the upper right. If you follow that down, the next level down, you have 4 types below physics, and one of them, the lower left, is obtaining, and you go further down from there, and that is the motivational set of elements. There are 16 elements in the motivational quad, and then next to it there are 16 in the evaluation quad and methodology quad and purpose quad. And the easiest way of defining the protagonist, antagonist, and so forth, their roles in a story, in the objective story, the easiest way of recognizing them, just the way our brains work, I guess the easiest way of recognizing them in terms of a goal-oriented story is through the motivational elements. That's where you see pursue, prevent, which would be protagonist and antagonist respectively. You have pursue, prevent, help, hinder, and those are the action types. And then the decision aspects are conscience, consider, reconsider, conscience, and hinder. And usually they are aligned. The protagonist is both consider and pursue, and antagonist is embodying both reconsider and prevent. And the guardian character has the 2 traits, help and conscience, and then the contagonist represents both hinder and temptation. And Darth Vader certainly embodies temptation. He himself was tempted by the Force, and he hinders the efforts of both the rebels and the Empire. And so going into Jaws, this is another good example. The protagonist would clearly be Chief Brody, and I had to think for a moment to make sure I get the name correct. And then the antagonist is a shark. Without the shark, you'd have no movie. The shark is the true source of overall conflict. However, and then you also have the helper character, which would be Hooper, the expert from Woods Hole or wherever he came from, the Oceanographic Institute. You also have the mayor. Now, these are the four principal driver characters. There is also a set of four passenger characters that comment and add upon the main story. But these four are the ones that drive the story and directly cause plot twists and turns. You have the mayor, who represents temptation. He's not the direct villain or antagonist. He is the one that represents temptation. He's trying to tempt for money reasons. He's trying to, and his own career as a mayor, he's trying to tempt the people to come to visit the beach, even though there's a threat of a shark, a very real threat of a shark. He uses various ways to tempt, and he hinders the efforts of the protagonists in various ways. So he's not directly the antagonist so much as the shark is actually literally killing people off. And Dramatica when you put in the attributes, the story form that the Dramatica session found was that the concern that's in the objective story that everybody is concerned with, it sounds funny, the issue that everyone is concerned with is, I forget the exact term that's in the Dramatica periodic table, but it's involving personal interest. There's some kind of special interest that each character is involved with and motivated by. I forget exactly what Chief Brody's personal interest is or special interest is, but the shark has a special interest in basically feeding itself on these swimmers, and the shark hunter, I forget his name exactly, the one who survived the delivery, the attempted delivery of the bomb during World War II, and then the elder one, the one that they ultimately hired to go kill the shark. He has a vested interest in, well, it's more like vengeance, really. He has a vested interest in killing the shark, and Hooper, I think, has a vested interest in making a name for himself, something like that. But each of the four have a vested interest. They are all different, but if you look at this periodic table, what the algorithms and the application, the software of Dramatica calculated was interest. I forget the exact term. It's essentially it's the opposite of altruism. It's personal vested interest. It's a term that means personal vested interest, and that's below. Is it doing or obtaining? It's either. I think it's doing or obtaining. I think it's doing, because the type of conflict in the objective story is that you have a shark killing people. It's not that the shark simply exists somewhere in the ocean. That's not a conflict. It's not that the shark. So that's when I'm trying to remember whether it's obtaining or doing. I think it's more like doing. I could make an argument. I have to look at it, but I could see it either way. It's either that the shark is doing something, it's eating people, or that it's trying to obtain people and is eating. When I think about it, I don't think eating is obtaining, really. I think eating would be more like doing, and that's causing the conflict. So in the objective story, when you're creating characters in terms of their role, not in terms of personal lives, not in terms of the subjective story, or in terms of what the main character, impact character is doing. Those are three other totally separate through lines. In the objective story, you can have a character, for example, Chief Brody is both the main character in the main character through line, and he serves a function as protagonist in the objective story. So in the objective story, the different characters have a common value or common concern, which would be, again, I forget the term, it's like vested interest. But they each have their own vested interest. So the value itself is just vested interest, but you have to identify what the vested interest is, what that value means for each of the characters in your objective story. So that's what I wanted to say, and I felt I couldn't go on through watching the reaction to Jaws without having said that. So there you go. And again, I'll see you next time. Bye.